Hopefully you can see my Rembrandt there or whatever he is.
Shakespeare.
It's not even that. This is actually it's a picture that a lot of people think of as Shakespeare, but it's really just a caricature called the Bard. And I don't know if Shakespeare actually looked like this or not. I could never be clear, but nonetheless, the idea is here. So again, this is amateur authorship submitting preparing and submitting an article for publication. I guess the first question you'd ask yourself is why would you want to do this? Because it's really not an easy task. I found that the amount of time that it excuse me takes to put together a modeling project while you're also taking photographs and trying to remember everything that you're going to write extends that modeling experience out probably 2 or 3 or 4 times what it would take if you just built the thing. But nonetheless, it's number one, it's fun and gratifying to do this. You're a creative person to begin with. You're creating in various different dimensions artistically, and if you can do that successfully, there's you're probably okay at putting together a presentation or writing about it. The second one is you really learn your subject. Years ago, I learned that the best way to really know your subject is to explain it to other people in a sort of a how-to process. I learned that when I was an accounting student, and I tutored lower division accounting students in my spare time. And by me explaining the ins and the outs of the general ledger and the various journal entries that had to take place to make it all come together, I found that I had developed an expertise that I wouldn't have otherwise. And this applies to any discipline, I'm pretty sure. But certainly in this case, if you can, got something in my throat here. Sorry. If you can put together a how-to article that people can actually read and follow and do something, then you've kind of cemented that process in your brain, so you know the material better. The third reason is that you can serve your hobby this way. This is a way to, I guess, I hate the term give back, but that's really what this is. You're sharing your portion of the hobby, as obvious as it may seem to you, how to do something or how to figure something out or whatever the subject might be. There's going to be somebody else out there who's going to see an aha moment when they hear about how you did it or what you did. And this is your way that you can actually serve the hobby and help people other than yourself enjoy it greatly. And fourth, and probably least important, is that you can gain recognition from others in the hobby. And that alludes specifically to the NMRA Achievement Program for the Model Railroad author. Another reason that I kind of think is cool is that editors will absolutely love you. They really wish that articles would grow on trees, but they don't. As an editor, I have to rely on what I get over the transom or from repeat authors. So anything that comes in is a welcome submission as far as I'm concerned. I don't know that the major publications really respond in this way, but they claim to. Every once in a while, you'll see a plea from the editor of RMC or Model Railroader or somewhere to submit your work because they're soliciting content. But it kind of flies in the face of what they do with it, it seems to me, when you send stuff in and you never hear from them. But nonetheless, this is true. As a divisional publication, I mean, a regional publication, I definitely appreciate any content that comes in. So that's another reason to do it. Help out your poor editor. So where do you get ideas? There's all kinds of ways to do this, but I think probably one of the best is to look around your layout or someone else's layout for a scene or a vignette or some other thing that really piques your interest. And you could come up with an idea for a story. In this case, we're looking at a picture of Walt Shedler's Dunsmuir stop on his Southern Pacific layout. And there's a picture here, I mean, a story here I think you can see a little Volkswagen bus in the lower left-hand corner. There's a smattering of people on the deck. There's a rail diesel car waiting. There's all kinds of things. I think it's called getting ready to board the train or station stop or something like that. But I look at it a little differently. I know that this is in Dunsmuir, California, which is between Redding and the Oregon border. Um, it's a division point, still is, in fact. But the interesting thing is that this is the Southern Pacific rail diesel car, and SP had only one. It was the SP-10. It finished its career on the Northwestern Pacific. Last time I recall, it was I saw it actually in person in Willits. So far as I know, it never made it to the West Valley branch or the East Valley branch or anything north of Redding. It was never on that part. So my question in this, which could really put together an interesting story, is why would this SP-10 be visiting Dunsmuir? It certainly never had. So I think that in itself is a story. I had a lot of fun chiding Walter about this when I saw the photo. Oops, a little too far here. If you ever watched Dobie Gillis, you're familiar with this statue. Um, this is called the Thinker. And here's another way to come up with ideas. Just think about what you're planning to build. The example I'll use a little later on is starting to build some bench work. And what do you need to do that is figure out the plans in your head, how it's going to come together, what materials you're going to need, what tools, and that sort of thing. But you can put this line of thinking on just about anything that you're planning to do. Currently, I'm building a little railroad station from scratch, and I'm trying to think through every process for every little detail, from pouring the foundation out of casting plaster to lighting the super or the ceilings and so forth when it's ready to go together. So I'm thinking about this all along, and at the same time, I'm generating ideas for an article, which I'll probably never put together, but nonetheless, thinking about these kinds of things can give you a plan for an article you might want to put together. Another thing is to think outside the box a little bit. Or the different types of tools you might be using is the example I'm using here. Um, one of the clever things that I saw was you can see the picture down here. It's a combination square with two squares on it, and you wouldn't think of taking two of these things and putting them together necessarily, like you see here. But somebody came up with this idea and put a little article in one of the publications. It was either RMC or Model Railroader about how this thing would work to help you keep buildings square on your work surface when you're putting them together. It just makes a lot of sense. It also makes a nice clamp to hold everything together. And I've actually done this. It worked great, and it was a good idea. Perhaps you can be clever as well and come up with something like that. And this is a perfect subject for a little short thing. Maybe a good way to get started, get your feet wet with something like this. Oops. The other thing that you can do is read everything. Now, I've listed a lot of examples of model railroad publications here that you can look at. You probably are familiar with all of them. The smaller ones are our division newsletters. There's Call Board, the Observation, and I think there's a Coast Dispatch in there. And then, of course, my favorite is the Sierra Division Shortline. But you can also read about other things too. Um, it's it's just good to read because you learn styles and you learn what doesn't work, and that's probably the best way to do it. Imagine trying to oh be a musician in a symphony orchestra or something, and you've never ever listened to classical music. This is the same concept here. You really need to read in order to write. The other thing is the submission guidelines. They're all over the place, but next slide or so, there's going to be a list of them um, for the major publications and also one for the PCR branch line. This is a very important that you follow the guidelines of the publication that you wish to submit to, because if you miss a couple little details, we're not even going to bother to look at it. They have a set format and a certain amount of time to work through these articles, determine which ones they want and where they're going to place them. And if you're not helping them by not following their submissions guidelines, your chances of being published are really, really poor. Here's a list of the different guidelines. There's a link for each one of these on here, and you'll find that these are the four major ones that I came up with. Uh, we should all be familiar with NMRA magazine and the two major publications, and then the Railroad Hobbyist is an online publication that most of us are familiar with. Mm-hmm. If you request a PDF of this presentation, the links should be hyperlinks for you, so you can just click on these and let them go. So that'll take you to these. These are current. I checked them all yesterday. Unless somebody updated their submission guidelines overnight, these should be current. Again, you can get those if you ask for a copy of this this presentation. And you can certainly get my guidelines just by emailing me. My number is here, as well as my email address. If for some reason you lose this, you can find me on page 2 of the branch line in the call board. I'm easy to get to, and usually I respond immediately when I see these things. And I do have a little thing that'll help you work your way through what I like to have. And my submission guidelines are not nearly as strict as the national publications, but nonetheless, it'd be great if you could follow what I've suggested. Probably the most critical thing about all of this is getting good photographs, legible photographs that can be used and clearly reproduced in the publication. You can have horrible prose and bad spelling and bad grammar and all that kind of stuff, but I can work with that. I can clean that up. Any editor can do that. But if the pictures are not good, there's nothing I can do to help you. And if you don't submit decent, good, clear photos in a proper resolution required for the publication, the article is not of much use, because a picture is indeed worth 1,000 words. Definitely is. It used to be that you needed a good digital SLR. Not so much anymore, because the digital phones, your cell phones with digital cameras on them, have advanced to the point where they can do an awful lot of the heavy lifting these days.
Yeah.
There's certainly some close-up work that you definitely want to use this type of a camera for, particularly if you're going to use a macro lens to look at some little small items. But for the most part, I found that with a cell phone, I can get down at track level and take pictures that I had no way I could do with a big bulky body camera like this. So actually being able to use both is going to be good. Again, they used to not be the best, but now absolutely are. In fact, there's a fellow who advocates the use of, well, there's probably several fellows that advocate the use of digital cell phones for almost all of the railroad photography that they do. And tell your story with the photos. I've got an example here of how this works. This was something that was in the division short line years ago. Jim Collins, some of you may know him, submitted an article about converting a Western Pacific tender from coal to oil. In our neck of the woods, the WP didn't burn coal at all. It was all oil here. There's a few spots, I think, in east of us that the Western Pacific might have used coal, but for the most part, their steam locomotives were oil burners. So there was a need for him to change this. And even without any text, he goes from one photo to the next. And each one shows a different step in the process and actually tells the story from beginning to end. It's kind of hard to see, but in the very first photo up there, it shows the existing coal load. and going through the process of cutting it out, doing a little modification, adding a new top, adding a hatch, and all that, you end up with the tender at the bottom that is pretty accurate for a Western Pacific oil burning tender. The words are not even needed here. You can tell what's going on just by looking at the pictures. This is looks like I'm kind of top half of this has been truncated. You probably heard of Brooks Stover. He models in S scale, and he's put all kinds of articles in all the publications. But he has a thing that it's called shoot, a Model Railroader's Guide to Digital Photography. This came out, I don't know how long ago, but it's probably the best, most practical way to talk about using a cell phone for your photographs. Another thing I ran across recently was Jack Burgess, and in this little clinic, he talks about using the smartphone and an iPad and some photo stacking. Another one is Ed Marin has a clinic that he did probably 1 or 2 years ago on this same thing on photo stacking. Both of those are good references along with the Brooks Stover publication. You can go to the NMRA website. There's a link here that will send you to all kinds of clinics and other things that deal with photography. I noticed when I ran this link that it takes you to a limited amount of photography articles, but if you're signed in as a member, you can go here and you're going to get a lot more of them. So keep that in mind if you decide to go there. RMC has a department, they call it the company photographer. I think it's every other month in their publication. There's a thing about photography by this fellow that has been a professional photographer and provides some interesting articles, really wonderful stuff. If you're interested in his perspective, take a look at RMC and find the company photographer. Model Railroader has this one. I think this is I can't remember the name of the guy that wrote this, but this is an excellent video. I think it's about an hour long. It's a clinic format that you can also find a lot of tips on photography. And of course, you can also hire a professional photographer if you don't want to do all of that. The point is that submission to a publication has to have good photos. Without it, you're sunk. So, writing the article. Okay, you've got this idea. You know what you're going to do. You have a pretty good idea of what the photos are going to be as you go. You take a lot of them during the building process. But how do you get started with the actual text and that sort of thing? Just sitting there looking at a blank page can be very, very intimidating. You're probably envisioning the whole work completed, but you haven't even begun to start. So there's some certain steps you can go through to break the ice, so to speak, or get through the writer's block. First thing to do is kind of a version of what we used to call brainstorming, where people would sit around with a whiteboard and throw all kinds of data and information at it. And none of it had to really make sense. It was just getting ideas from everybody in the group. Well, here's what you can do on your own. Just take a sheet of paper and write down everything you can think of that might have to do with the article that you're writing. Just get it down there, get as much as possible. Doesn't need to be in any order. Doesn't need to make any particular sense. One clause doesn't have to lead to the other and so forth, but you've got it all out there. And what this will do, just writing the stuff down is the first step to get the things out of your brain and onto the paper. It sounds kind of hocus pocus to do this, but it actually works. This is the first step in the creative process when it comes to writing something. Once you've got all the tidbits, then you can begin to organize them, perhaps in the form of an outline. In this case, I'm talking about building bench work for a model railroad. So I want to consider the planning considerations. You know, how high is it going to be? What the aisle width is going to be? What type of construction is it going to be? You know, is it going to be portable? Is it going to be permanent? What do I need to do to make it portable? What materials am I going to use? What tools am I going to have to borrow or steal or whatever? And once you've got that outline, you can begin fleshing in your article. Now, not every article really needs an outline. We talked a little bit about the short article that was just an idea about some tool that you're going to use that isn't normally part of your toolbox. You want to share that with somebody. That's a very short article, and outlining that would be kind of ridiculous. So it's not always necessary. In a major modeling project, it's probably a must, but for those little things, not so much. And I'll just offer this to anybody who's interested. Um, you don't have to be a good writer. You don't have to actually do any of the outlining, but you can just give us an idea and we can work together to come up with what the article might look like. Um, you may not want to go to the trouble to write all of it, but if you have a lot of good ideas and a lot of interesting points on how it could go together, um, we can work together and come up with an article that we can publish. Back to Jim Collins, the one who did the tender with the modification. I interviewed him. He's a professional technical writer, and I wanted to know some of his thinking about how he comes up with articles and how he writes them. Of course, he is actually being hired to write uh, how-to manuals for the professional world, but he has some good ideas here. He talks a little bit about the use of outline, and he says it is dependent upon the scope of the project. Clearly, the little tiny ones don't need them, but the large ones do. Then he says you want to make sure that you draft in the proper order, and you can do this editing process. He's talking about making 2 or 3 passes and what you do with the first pass, the second pass, and the third pass. And here he suggests that you start with looking for the mechanics to begin with, spelling errors, and finally grammar. This is his way of doing it. And he noted that formats such as the short line and the branch line, he talks about the use of a point and shoot camera, a digital camera, or a cell phone. And this is basically mirrors what I said before about the cameras. And finally, he's got some pretty good advice and how to actually uh, take the best pictures and how to make yourself sound the way you want to, as far as being in the first person, second person, or third person. Finally, you want to assemble all of this, and you need to be able to submit it in some format that can be used by the publication. I just noticed a couple here that I had when I put this thing together years ago. The two probably most popular at the time were the Microsoft Word, and I believe WordPerfect is a Corel product. The other way that a lot of people ask you to submit it is in the body of the text of the email itself. The thing is to be able to help the editor to transcribe your work into the actual publication without having to do a lot of typing. You need to be sure when in your text or some other way that you indicate where the pictures probably should be and what the captions should be. So a little outline like you see here is really helpful. I sometimes get these from people, and a lot of times I don't. And the ones where I get these make editing the thing and putting the pictures in the right place a much simpler job. And finally, we probably all know this now that you need to have a way to move your files. Generally, they're not going to be able to be emailed easily. So using Dropsend or Dropbox or something like that, what is it, Google Drive or Google Share or something, is the way to go. You could also put it on a thumb drive and mail it if you chose to. But emailing probably isn't going to work if you've got an article that's of any substance. These things are little thumbnails of the photos, so you can help the editor get an idea what it is that you're talking about with a little tiny caption, so that they'll be able to recognize what this picture is and how it matches up with the captions that they put into the text. This is helpful because sometimes you don't know for sure which photo matches which caption. This takes the mystery out of it entirely. Then we have the achievement program. You're probably familiar with this. I mentioned it earlier. This is the Model Railroad Author. You can find these things on the NMRA website, and it just shows the number of points you can get for publishing things in a national, a regional, and a divisional publication. And there's also, you can put together clinics and present them. If you do something electronically, like I'm doing now, there's points available for that. When these categories were originally, the criteria was designed, we didn't have a lot of digital anything at that point. So electronic publications are now a part of this and have been for some time. This is a pretty easy certificate to pick up. And I notice as I look at the new NMRA master modelers that show national model master model railroaders, excuse me, that show up every month. They almost all have this as one of their certificates. In many cases, it happens to be the first one. I've heard it said that the paperwork is the most intimidating part of the process for any certificate. It may seem to be that way, but I think the NMRA has simplified it to the degree that it's really not as difficult as some people seem to think it is. Organizing what you've done is probably the first step here. Transcribing it into a form is pretty darn simple. There's really pretty easy way to go here. Now, you see these different things. These happen to pertain to this model railroad author. You'll find that the other AP categories have very similar forms, if not identical. I put together a Excel version of this. This is well, it's called a record and validation form. I know it's got a number of its own, but I did this in Excel so I could easily do all the math and get everything in order and make it clear. This is something I have this template. If you choose to go this route with any of the AP certificates, I'd be more than happy to send this template to you, and you can use it to record your work on whatever certificate it is that you're pursuing. In this case, I added that template to this one, and these are exhibit tags. In the model railroad author category, you need to send in clear photocopies or tear sheets or something from the different publications. And these numbers correspond with the list that I just showed. And these are little tags that you can stick with each one of those exhibits so that whoever is reviewing this will know exactly what it is that they're looking at. Here's another interesting video that I ran into. This was, oh shoot, I don't know when this came out, but this is part of it actually is a clinic that was presented at a national convention by Cynthia Priest, who is the editor of the NMRA magazine. If you follow this link, you're going to have to enter your NMRA password and username to get to it because it is user material and it's not open to the general public. But this is an excellent article that kind of mimics what I'm saying here and is certainly a little more thorough. And it's from a professional editor as well. And that, gentlemen, is my presentation. Again, there's some good information and some good links here. And I think you would get quite a bit of use from looking this over if you have any desire to submit a publication. Again, my email is chipmeriam@comcast.net. I can be found on page 2 in the call board of the PCR branch line. All it takes is a simple email or a phone call, and I'll be happy to send a a PDF of this presentation and anything else that you might want as far as publication guidelines or answer any questions. So that, my friends, is my presentation, and I'll field any questions if there are any.
All right, don't forget to unmute yourself, and it looks like Frank has got the floor.
Yeah, Chip, one thing I want to add, you need to, when they send you a markup of how they've edited it, you need to review it very closely. I had one time with one magazine, doesn't matter which one, national, and they changed around things so much that it made no sense if you were building it. So I had to go in and make changes and send them back, and then I wanted to see it again. It took a long time, but they finally got it right. So I really suggest doing that.
Yeah, that's excellent. I've had the same experience, actually not in the model railroad realm, but it made me look like an idiot had I let it go. It just, yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thanks for having
Chip,
me,
if I
guys.
may,
Sure.
one thing I found is that I was able to take skills I had developed in my professional life, writing for work and at work, and a lot of that stuff just transferred right over to writing for the hobby press, because good writing is good writing, you know, all those sorts of things. And so don't be afraid to say, well, how did I do it when I was writing something for work? It's not like you have to start afresh. I wrote for years for trade publications and so on, and so it all was very useful for me in terms of starting to write for the model railroading publications.
I agree. That's that excellent training for anybody. Not only just the written word, but also public speaking, as I'm sure you can attest as well, David.
Oh, yes. And the one other thing that I don't know, Chip, how you or Bob Gardine are on this, but uh, the passive voice is really hard to break in the professional world. It's almost habitual, but I think particularly for hobby writing, first person, and also I just think about, okay, I'm sitting in front of some guy, right? Somebody, other modeler, and I'm saying, okay, now this is how I did this. Look at this, and just imagine you're conversing with somebody and turn that conversation into text, and you're off and running.
Yeah, I think you'll find that in a how-to article, like I'm suggesting a lot of us might want to jump into, the first person is most appropriate. Where you can also get tripped up is if you're talking in the first person and all of a sudden you switch to second or third, and where you're actually straight on, now you're passive. The other area where people get tripped up, and I have to follow pretty closely when I'm editing, is the tense will change frequently back and forth, or um, the plurality will change from single to many and back and forth without the writer having thought about what they said the sentence earlier. They go from "I did this" to "we thought that," and it's just to me, it's like listening to a piece of music and hearing a note that's out of tune. It just causes a dissonance. After a while, it's just there. It's easy to spot if you're attuned to it. So, David, that's an excellent comment. I agree with that. And Bob, I think you would say the same, would you not?
Yep. I think the other thing that's important too is to keep sentences short and crisp. It's very easy in conversations to have, 100-word sentences. But if you're trying to help somebody understand how to build something or why they want to do something or a new idea, it's important to keep them short and crisp. So I'm a big believer in short sentences and stop with the conjunctions. Just sort of do that.
Agree. Being concise and precise is the name of the game. I'm sure you see a lot of it. I know I do. I see a lot of run-on sentences with lots of commas, and it as a reader, it gets a bit laborious to try to get through that. So
I'd like to just suggest one other thing in a way, sort of self-serving, because I'm doing Coast Division. I don't want to step. I really appreciate what you've done for Branch Line, but I think all of us have tools and methods and things that we've figured out how to do that we can share with each other. And the audience of this publication is largely seasoned model railroaders. These are not going, to people, teenagers who are just starting for the very first time generally. And so I think a lot of us have some really interesting and useful tips or tricks or adaptations. I took an inexpensive micromark table saw and made a little table saw out of it. And so this is a little one pager in the making, because this is it wasn't very useful as a $49 standalone saw, but it's a really great tool with a bed next to it. So there's all kinds of things that we've done already that are probably next to you on your right or on your left. So if you wanted to make an article, that's something that somebody else could benefit from. David Gibbons' input to me was, think about helping other people in the hobby and sharing what you've learned. Because the way I look at it is, everything I'm doing, I appreciate the NMRA for everything I learned from everybody around me. So it's just an opportunity to give back. So I appreciate what you've done, Chip, and you did a great clinic. So thank you.
thank you. I appreciate that. And that's a good illustration of what I said in the beginning about giving back to the hobby. One of the reasons that you want to write an article is to share it with your peers, basically. And along those lines, Bob, I do have space in the upcoming Branch Line for a few words on your kit bash table saw. So you know how to find me. It's
Excellent.
great fun to look at. I'm sure the other divisions in the PCR would like to have you share that with them as well. So
Awesome.
right, I'll look forward to it.
Do we have any other questions for our presenter?
I was just going to point out that I do this sort of crazy thing with a blog spot just to keep my writing skills up for short articles. Maybe a few of you might have seen it, but it's a way to keep doing it. Now, the worst thing I ever did was a 70-page master's thesis in history,
Oh,
and it wound up in the Library of Congress.
Not all of us can say that.
yeah, but it was all about Southern Pacific oil tenders used from 1920 to 1922, Ken.
Actually, it had to do with the Southern Pacific and the history of New Zealand.
All right. Okay. Mr. Edholm, do you hear us?
I do. Can you guys see me okay? You probably need to spotlight me.
One moment.
This was kind of as advertised. So I'm at the convention. The train, I don't know, what time is it? Is it 10? It's not 10 o'clock yet, is it?
9:45.
Okay, we'll see if I can get in early, because the train show is not supposed to open until 10, but I thought I would just walk around a little bit and let you guys kind of see what the convention looks like. So I'm going to flip to my other camera. And you guys will see. So this is the clinic.
While Phil's doing that, I'm going to sign off, David. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chip.
Sure.
Appreciate you making time for me.
Our pleasure.
So this is kind of intended for those of you that have not been to a national convention to get an idea of kind of what it's like. So this is, and of course, Saturday is kind of the last day. And they're asking me to be a little quiet here when the doors are open, so I will not talk a lot, but so this is pretty typical of what you would see at a convention of, clinic rooms. Some of them are open because there are fewer clinics on on Saturday here. But so one hall with clinic rooms, I think they have 7 or 8 clinic rooms here open. And so I'm going to go ahead and walk back out this way. Here's Chuck, a Coast Division member. Say hi. It's a Saturday video, folks. So we'll walk back out this way, and then the National Train Show normally is in a convention center because of some issues with the convention center.
Okay, folks, we'll wait here for just a minute and see if Phil comes back. Yeah, Phil, if you can hear me, it's frozen at this end.
Am I back?
Yeah, frozen
Am
video.
I back now, or you can hear it? Okay, hang on. Let me see if it'll restart. Let me switch my camera and see if that causes it to get going again. Did that restart the video?
Yeah, it's running. It's jerky, but it's running.
Okay, cool. I don't know. I'm on the hotel Wi-Fi. So, by the way, this is an ad for next year's national convention, which is in Novi, Michigan. And Walter just walked off. This is the table where they have the advertisement for the Daylight Limited, which is the PCR convention in San Luis Obispo in March of next year. So what they've done is set up outside, and normally in the convention centers, these are inside, but you see here a very large N-scale Primo layout. There's probably going to be a lot of noise here, so you may or may not be able to hear me very much. But basically, this is, as you can see, a fairly large Primo layout here that they're operating on. Then over here, next to that is an N-track layout. And some pretty cool modeling on both of those. And then as we go a little bit farther, these are the Southern California European train enthusiasts. I particularly like this model of the Roman ruins and the other things that you get to model if you're modeling Europe. And then finally, down here at the end, there's an HO layout, and the HO folks are actually doing operations that are here in the outside. Normally these would be in the convention center, in the large room, but because this was in the hotel, they're actually inside here today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over and see if they'll let me in a little. I don't think they're supposed to open until 10, but hopefully I can get in a little early, and hopefully the video will continue to play here, so that we can do a little quick tour. It's a regional video, divisional video. And I go, cool. You're open anyway. So this is, and so you guys have to let me know if you lose the video. I don't know how well it's going to work in here. So some vendors, the Pico booth here. They really don't have booths because of the smaller setup. Normally, these guys would have a 10 by 20 foot booth, but here it's pretty much tables. Over here on this side, we've got Bachman. They made a number of announcements here at the train show. For those of you who are in HO, one of the sponsors is Scale Trains. And they have, one of the nice things about coming to a convention like this is you often get to see a lot of the products that you can only see on the internet, but you get to see them here. So the rest of this down on this end, I'm just going to kind of walk through. Down at the far end there, those are basically train hobby shops that typically come with an inventory and set them up. And then what we've got here, as you can see, a number of vendors. Here's Gordy. Gordy, say hi to the Coast Division. There he is. Gordy is the NMRA president. So what you see here is, and normally, like I said, a lot of these would have a booth or a little larger presence in a larger convention and national train show, but kind of the opportunity to see, this is Intermountain. and their products. So, one of the nice things about coming to an event like this is you get to see a lot of the vendors that you wouldn't normally see at other events. Kind of coming down here in the middle, Resource Rails here. They're again, an HO vendor. They do a lot of remotoring, I think, and those kinds of things. Lundy Studios is a manufacturer of a number of kits. They do a lot of really cool resin kits in HO and N. So, see their backdrops here and some of their buildings and other structures. And again, back here in the back of Model Train Solutions, which is a large train hobby shop. Spring Creek Model Trains, which actually is out of Dallas, Texas. And so typically you get a couple of large vendors like that. And, and one of the nice things with a vendor like this is they'll typically bring their kits with them. So you can actually see something and buy it at the show. Then in the middle here, what you see is there are a number of modular layouts. For those of you who are into S scale, this is the S Gaugers layout. So a promotion of S. One of the things that I thought was very cool here, they're still setting it up, is this company called CBOTS. And I'll try to come back by here, but what they do is they actually use a television, and on the television, they run a program where they actually put a ship on there and it'll actually move, and the television actually creates waves. And they have an application where you can create waves at the shoreline. You kind of saw it there for a moment. What you're seeing here is that little black thing that's moving around. He's going to actually turn it on and put it on here. And you notice there's a shark moving through the water. Let me turn this down so you guys can see better. And you notice he puts the ship on there, and it's actually battery powered. And it follows a diagram that you diagram in the programming mode on the TV. You can see it there. That's how you program it. And you can program the waves breaking on the shore and the waves behind the ship. And they also have, this is all in HO scale. They also, here's another example. They have a ship here that's rocking.
N scale.
Or N scale also, yes, an N scale. This is an N scale ship here. So, this one's HO, I guess. So yeah, you see that what it does is the software generates a wake behind the ship. So they're doing this just with a Samsung, television monitor. I thought that was pretty cool. You can, put a harbor in your layout by adding a monitor in. Some other vendors that are here, some vendors of artwork, and down at this end have a number of vendors that are selling, not so much a manufacturer, but people that came to sell different items. So, specializing in different kinds of products. And a wave, howdy. Over here, we've got an N scale. So if you're into N scale, an incredible opportunity. I'm envious of how much opportunity and options there are to buy here. So if you're an N scale for $4.99, you can buy some rolling stock here or locomotives for $29.99. Sorry, we're being so fast here, but I kind of wanted to move through this. So, here's here's again another display of different kinds of track, primarily again in N scale. The Loco-Fi, who I think a number of you know, is actually here. We're a little bit before they open, so they haven't set up and opened yet. This is their display here. And then kind of coming around here again, some other vendors.
Phil, pause for a second. If you hear me, Phil, could you pause for a second?
Certainly.
Does anybody have a question for Phil about anything you're seeing here? Anything you want him to come back to? No, we got crickets. Carry on, Phil.
No worries. Yeah, no, just interrupt me if you want me to stop and show you something in more detail. So basically, again, this is again primarily N scale in this area. It's kind of one of the things I think they've tried to do is put things by scale. Here's a modular layout that I think these guys may be Z scale here. And so one of the things that you can do is you can submit your modules to the contest or in the celebration of models. So you can see this was an individual module, second place. This was the design preservation model. This is Utah. You can tell that. Oh, that was from Utah. This one's from Long Beach. There you go. So this one's from Long Beach. So some of the vendors basically do awards based on the use of their products. So this one here was best of show. It is obviously a model of a big passenger ship and, you know, fairly large, excuse me, let me push this down, model of a harbor. And then, you know, amazing how much volume you can get into a Z-scale layout and how cool you can make it look. You know, again, coming back to vendors, this is ESU. We'll kind of catch them on the other side. You know, again, this is primarily N scale in this area. And then we kind of come around here and we've got some White River, the NMRA, kind of, you have a couple of the, what I'll call associations like the S-Gauge Association, the O-Scale, the O-Gauge Association was here as part of the SIG groups. There's a company here that has, for those of you that are having challenges seeing, has some great products called Rose Micro Solutions. And by the way, all the vendors are on the convention website. So if you see something here and you want to go see one of the vendors, and these are some very cool, basically magnifying glasses. And I really like the ones that include safety glasses. So many times when you take your Dremel out and you start cutting with that blade and you get in close, you don't realize the danger you're putting your eyes in if that blade, if that disc blows apart and actually get pieces in your eyes. And then over here is this is White River Productions, you know, who publishes a number of magazines and other productions. Then basically a desk where you can ask an MMR. And then we'll kind of close off here, walking at the end, the ESU booth. Normally at most of the conventions, what you'll see is the vendors will have a booth like this. This is much more what you'll see. So you'll see a booth this size for a lock sound or a Soundtrax, and then you'll see a booth for Atlas or Bachmann that's 4 times the size of this. Here's KD. And then Bachmann made some announcements. For those of you, I'm an ON30 modeler. They announced here at the convention a new version of the Heisler and a couple of other locomotives. So generally, one of the nice things is you can come see kind of the newest announcements of things at the convention. So that was basically it. I think we've come back around to the entrance. I'll kind of pop this back around, and any questions or comments? Was that fun to see?
I just know that that is the least amount of money I've ever spent going through a train show.
Oh, absolutely. Virtual participation in train shows is a very cost-effective way to participate. So cool. Well, the network here is probably at best mediocre. So I'm gonna probably bid you all adieu, but I hope that was fun, and you kind of got an idea of what it looks like. So normally at a national train show, it's about 4 times the size of this. Probably 2 to 3 times as many modular layouts as you saw here. For example, originally, before they had this issue with the convention center and the drayage fees, I know our ON30 group was planning on coming down along with a couple of others. We would have had a huge ON30 layout, but they just didn't have enough space. So, but it gives you an idea of kind of some of the vendors that come and what you would see if you come to a convention here in the future. Because, you know, the next convention on the West Coast will be in Tacoma in 3 years. So, you know, if you haven't been to a national convention, you probably want to start marking that down on your calendars to think about going, because just like LA, you know, you can drive to Tacoma. I went up for a narrow gauge convention there, and it's a drive you can do in a day. Just drive up there. Or if you want to, you can stop halfway. I think I did on the way up. I stopped halfway up and spent the night and then drove the rest of the way up.
All right.
So with
Well-
that, I'm going to bid you guys adieu and pop out and let you guys all have your conversation for the rest of the day. And unless there are any questions or comments, I'll say goodbye.
Thank you for our roving
Thanks,
model
guys.
railroad
Have a great-
reporter,
Thanks, Phil.
Phil.
Have a great couple of weeks, and we will
Okay.
see you in the future.
All right. Bye-bye. All right. So I have a short presentation I can make if you guys are interested. It is something that eventually I may work into an article, but I threw something together. And but maybe what I'll do first here is, does anybody have anything else they want to talk about before I sit and wave my arms some more?
Yeah, just really briefly.
Go.
So I'm working on the Coast Dispatch. So I really appreciated Chip soliciting articles for the branch line. So I tried not to interrupt him, but I'm trying to get articles for the Coast Dispatch, and I'm putting that together. So I just wanted to say, if anybody is interested in contributing, I'll put my email in the chat. And I just wanted to say that I appreciate David's support, and I've also got some support and interest in some other contributions as well. So I'll just say thank you very much. I'm looking to publish by the end of August. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, David.
All right. David, Jesse, Vincent, Rich. All right. All right, I'm going to throw up something quick. It's not very long. It's sort of a trial horse here, and I'll be looking to make notes on this. Let's see if I can get this going here. All right. Do you guys see a PowerPoint? Bob, do you see a PowerPoint presentation?
Sure do.
Okay. So I, in doing some work, actually over a period of time, I've been aware of issues about weighting of cars. And I'm trying to come at it from a little different perspective here, which is axle loading. It's not usually put that way. It's just very simple. The recommended practice says your car is this long, then take an ounce of weight and add a half an ounce for every inch of length. Or, you know, as it goes with the different scales and stuff. But this is my first pass, if you will. It might end up as an article, but right now, or as a clinic. But here we go. So, and I'm not going to read the slides per se, but rather talk about them. Let me know at any point if you want to make some comments, and I'll just edit this thing if I to catch your comments. All right, so here you go. Three ordinary cars, right? First, there's the Sierra. Based on the recommended practice in HO, notice the axle loading is 0.85 ounces per axle for this car. But then we go to the 50-foot car and do a little math, and it moves up to 1.12 ounces per axle. This is considering you have two standard two axle trucks, right? Now we go to that 85-foot high cube box car, and now we're up to 1.7 ounces per axle. And this is just right out of the NMRA recommended practice for weighting. Now, there are two factors I think that are in play for why the recommended practice came out the way it did, which is when you enter a curve, you can get the action where the two cars, as the car starts coming to the curve, it swings over, and so it's going to tug on the other car and try to derail it. That is a factor in any non-straight track, entering it, leaving it, S-curves, going through crossovers. The other thing is that we have a issue as we come through a curve that there is a sideways force as the cars are coming around the curve. The prototype sees it as drag And sometimes in curves, the other way this is evidenced isn't something the prototype runs into called string lining, where you're pulling hard in a curve and a light car that's in the curve, particularly long ones, will get pulled right off the track as the car on either end are sort of pulling at it sideways because you're in the curve. So that's the main reason that I understand that the weight recommendation, I have to be careful and not say requirement. It's not a standard, it's a recommended practice. But why that is that way. So now we'll talk about abnormal. Anybody going to come up with the joke from Young Frankenstein? You telling me you put an 85-foot abnormal car in your layout? So here are some examples of a couple of abnormal cars. There's no prototype for this car. It's modeling a wrecked Amtrak car, Amtrak locomotive, that slid down, it hit something and then slid down an embankment, is all chewed up. I should have flipped it around, but I scrounged up some old Athearn 8-axle flat cars and then cut and kit bashed to make one long enough. But the thing is it's got 8 axles under it instead of 4. And what's the right weight for this car? So the car's 55 foot long. So your target, following the recommended practice, if it was just 4 axles under there, it'd be 1.13 ounces per axle. But since I've got 8 axles under there, I'm at half of that at 0.6 ounces per axle. And that's even less than the axle loading that the little 35-foot car has. So should I load this car to 9.6 ounces to get it up to the standard 1.2 ounces for axle for a car of this length? What do you guys think? Any comments, any questions, any thoughts?
I would,
If you load
I
it,
like heavy in the sense that, as you say, when you go through any kind of track work that isn't dead straight, you've got, heavy tends to track better. And I can see this thing conceivably falling over, if you will, when you hit on a curve, if gravity isn't helping you hold it down.
Right. By the way, the F40PH is gutted. It weighs very little. I stripped it of most of the guts inside. So from the outside, it looks complete, but it weighs very little. When I add the weight, it's going to be in that fish belly in the car to keep the center of gravity low. But I'm not worried so much about tipping, Jesse, as just keeping the wheels on the rail. And that's where my perspective here. Tipping is another issue, and that has a lot to do with where the weight is, whether it's low or high. But yes, heavy does track better, but I think it's a diminishing returns. I'm trying to stay within the recommended practice here. Anybody else thoughts about how much weight to put in the fish belly in this car? Should I actually try for the 1.2 ounces per axle?
I'd almost make it layout situational with practice and in experiments.
Right.
There you go.
Can't really get it right just with the RP because every layout's going to be different.
Right. My understanding is the RP is sort of an average that is aimed at successful interchange between layouts, but certainly you can fine tune your car weighting if they're just going to be on home rails.
But
So
the RP done back in the days of 40-foot boxcar is the predominant freight car. And then
Mhm.
we have a whole nother story with passenger cars.
May I suggest that I think that the experimental a plan makes sense. My concern is that because of tolerances, one truck in the, say, on the front of the car, one of the two trucks is going to carry the most of the weight. It's like resistors. They're not exactly the same value. The resistor with
Mhm.
less resistance gets most of the current. So the one that has less weight on it might not track as well because it doesn't sit as low on the railhead, and so it might pick a point.
Right.
And so I would think that more weight might cause it to settle better. I don't know, but I think experimenting would be a smart thing.
Okay, Ken, I think Ken's got something else.
I think another thing that I'm just thinking about when I look at something, a car like that and weights and so forth, is actual wear on the plastic bearing surfaces we use for trucks.
Yeah. Now, mind you, if I load the car up to 9.6 ounces, I'm still only at 1.2 ounces per axle, which is the standard RP for a 55-foot car, 50-foot car. So in that sense, I'm not overloading the bearings. I'm simply, the load on the bearings would be that of a car of that length loaded.
Has anybody done a study on the bearings? The way in North American prototype? I mean, in English modeling, we actually use brass hat bearings in the axle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know, engineering plastics and a good needlepoint wheel set. I've seen cars, weighted to the standard, or pardon me, the recommended practice for years and years and years, and they were still happy. But certainly, having now helped and run O-scale equipment, the loading is much higher, and having something other than needle points gets to be perhaps a good idea. Now, Bob, you're nicely bringing me into the next slides here. So I'm noting experimentation needed is what I've added there. Okay, now, okay, here we go. Here's an articulated car. I got my paws after a lot of digging and scratching and eBay hunting. This is the end units of a 5-car articulated early well car set that was used by the Southern Pacific. And this car here, it was called a Versatainer, is what SP marked it as.
Hey guys, I gotta go.
Okay, Bob, take care.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, unfortunately, so do I. And we've got this recorded, right? So I can see
Yes.
the end of it.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Take care, everybody.
Okay. Take care, Jesse. Now, are you other gentlemen game to continue, or should we do this another time? Vincent, are you still up to go?
I'm fascinated.
All right.
I mean, the only thing I started thinking, if you wanted to comment, is
Yes.
if you remember back from our engineering, where you draw the vector arrows of the different forces.
Yep.
Right. If when it's, what is it? Conservation of force when it's static, conservation of momentum when it's moving, something like that.
Yep.
But I don't, if you really, that would be the way an engineer would probably do it.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the force is that's causing it to derail. So that's why
the force
like the thinking man. I'm trying to.
Yeah. The forces, as far as I understand it, you've got two to consider.
Yeah.
One is that the ends of cars, as they're going through into a curved track, the car that's entering the curve does this, and then the two couplers are providing force against the two trucks because it wants to pull it, and so you've got to keep them on the rail against that force. And then the other force is in a big curve.
Yeah.
The cars under tension want to suck in off the curve, called string lining. And now the thing is, on the we don't generally run radiuses as broad as the prototype. And so it is a concern. And the longer the car, the greater that effect. So those are the two obvious forces that will want to suck a truck off the track. And the way you oppose it is by loading the truck down, loading that axle down so that the forces don't pop the flange over the rail and you derail. It's a simple model. And indeed, there could be a whole bunch of physics and engineering, which I suspect the prototype does very carefully.
Yeah, it might be out of reach for us. Plus, we
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
have body flex, or there's probably something else going on that we don't necessarily see.
Well, I've run into other things having to do with unstable or weak structures of the car themselves,
Yeah.
where the coupler itself gets the coupling of force through the coupler becomes off angle. Instead of being straight across, it starts to pull up or pull down. There's also the behavior of the trucks themselves. If the truck is tipping or refusing to properly follow the rail to begin with, then some weight can help with that. But those are factors that also come into play on derailments. And that's a whole different can of worms.
I wonder for the testing, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take maybe two more comments. I wonder for the testing if you could make like a coupler that had like a tension spring on it or something. I don't know. I mean, this is O scale, isn't it? So
no, this is H. This is
all
it's
HO. Well, it might be either one is difficult.
Yeah. You're
the other
looking
thing,
here at measuring the side forces being applied through the couplers.
Something like that. Or the other thing I thought of is the result of those forces. If you remember the old, I think John Allen, where you put the ball in a car.
Yeah.
I guess he was trying to measure if you pull the car too quickly.
Yes.
But, obviously now with iPhones and things, they can do 3. This becomes a huge project, but you could put a sensor that would see the motions in different directions.
Certainly, I know that in my before I retired, one of the technologies we had were strain gauges.
Yeah.
And if you put extended draft gear and put a strain gauge on the side, you could see the strain being applied to the draft gear from the cup of the draft gear, and you could see you could capture that data. Of course, the cost to have that data acquisition would be equal to the cost of a very expensive locomotive.
Yes.
All right, well, let's drift along here.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so the picture shows, right, the two cars. The ends of the cars, what I did is I blocked up the trucks and then substituted a digital scale for the blocks. So I was able to measure the weight on the truck at the ends and in the middle. So that's how I measured the force being applied, if you will, to the axles, the axle loading. Now, those well car ends are 55 foot, so which is, per the recommended practice, 4.8 ounces. But the weight on the end trucks as measured is 1.1 ounces on the end truck and 2.3 ounces for the truck in the center. And I had to stare at that for a while before I realized that the end trucks are supporting half a car on each end. The center guy is supporting 2 halves of a car, twice as much. So that is why it was 1.1 ounce on the end trucks and 2.3 ounces in the truck in the center. So running empty, as shown here, the coupler end trucks have a 0.55 ounce per axle loading. The center truck actually is pretty good at 1.15 ounces per axle, which for a 50 is close to the recommended practice for the that length of car. So the thing that occurred to me, first of all, oh, by the way, these cars have lead weights or metal weights tucked into the bodies down at each end of the car, and that's how they get a bit of weight onto these things, so they aren't just that you can just blow at them and they'll come off the track. What occurs to me here is if I'm going to put containers on it, putting a container with a 1 ounce weight at one end of the container and put it so that weight is over towards the end of the cars rather than the center of will help to get those end units to have decent axle loading. So what I consume, here's my conclusions. Assuming everything else is good, I think that to get axle loadings for unusual cars up to 20.1 is something I would recommend to improve operating reliability. I have not dealt with rolling stock, and Ken may have more experience here on the European side of having the goods wagons with only 2 axles under, which means for any given one, they'll have twice the axle loading of an American prototype of the same length and weight. So that's the little thing I've just been thinking about. And any other comments or knock jokes, I'd be glad to make some notes here for turning this into either an article or a clinic.
Just a comment. When I was modeling European, actually,
Mhm.
I used to overweight the little wagons, the 2 axle wagons, and they worked perfectly.
Now, when you say overweighted against a standard, a recommended practice, or what was normal weight? How did you know what normal weight was, and how did you say, okay, I'm going to overweight it?
Full 2 ounces on a little 2 axle open, and then put a load to cover it.
Right.
Actually, and I also was using those 1/4 ounce weights that were adhesive, and I
Right.
stick those underneath, and so that they track when they were unloaded.
Right.
And I'd actually put about a 1/2 ounce, full 1/2 ounce on one of those for 2 axle trucks.
Right. Now, wait, you're saying you're tucking weights underneath. Is that what you're saying?
Both underneath, and if it had a load, I'd put something
Tuck it in there.
in the open, in the covered
Right.
things. I'd overweight with up to a full ounce.
Right. How many?
2 ounce.
Now the thing is, in that situation, were you running 100-car trains, 50-car trains, 10-car trains?
Now it's usually no more than 10 or 20.
Right.
10 actually on my last layout because there was no room to run it anywhere else. It was more or less a stage at the end of the line.
Right. Yeah, that's the other factor to this, of course, is how long of a train do you want to pull? How capable is your motive power? How bad is your grades, and how tight are your curves? All come into this. It's a real balancing act. But okay, thank you, Ken. Any other things here for those who remain standing at this juncture? Anything else from you, Vince?
Well, maybe two things. It might be interesting if it's prototypical to also have a pusher on the end of the train.
Oh, yes.
I mean,
And-
just yeah.
Right.
Yes, and see how that would affect it. I don't know if it would help or hurt it, but that's probably prototypical if you have a heavy load in the middle.
Oh, yes. Although then it actually adds to the fun even more, because when you're shoving, and if you've got a helper in the back shoving, then that's adding sort of another force that will want to derail equipment.
Yeah, that's true. So it might make it worse.
Yeah. Well, it's the nice thing with DCC is you can have the front and the rear on the same throttle setting, if you will, and that might make a difference. I hope in the future to be able to experiment with that on a future layout, because I like running. I might have a train that's 10, 15 feet long in HO scale. And if there's a grade, perhaps I do put a helper on the back end and then find out what happens.
And I wonder if there's a best practice from the prototypes of where they put because I'm sure they have extra heavy loads occasionally. And I wonder if there is a best practice, front, back, middle, or
Do you follow Virtual Railfan at all on YouTube? Virtual Railfan is a great place to see prototype practice in practice. And what I have seen is, for example, when they're moving transformers, massive transformers, they're typically at the head end.
Okay.
They will also, if they're running power just at the head end, things like empties and empty auto racks may be tacked on the back where the forces are less on the couplers and the cars.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But in, yeah, that's interesting because I'm trying to get this thought, helper service.
I'm familiar with SP helper practice at Port Costa in the 1950s. And their thing, the standard SP guideline at the time was you always cut in the helper 4 cars from the rear for long helper drags. But the Costa was just a short, sharp shove up the bridge, up to get the freight trains, eastbound freight trains, up to the Suisun Bay Bridge, which was an 80-foot rise and about a half a mile from Martinez Station. And for that, the SP made an exception, and they actually put the helper on the end behind the caboose, but with the provision that it had to be a steel underframe caboose.
What, you didn't like crushing cabooses?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They got them up to the top of the bridge, and the helper was not coupled. It was just it was not, the link was not made in the coupling.
Right.
And they would push up to the level of they got up to the level of the bridge, and then they'd cut off. Now they went across the bridge over to Bahia, and then would cross over to the westbound main to come back all the way down to Port Costa.
Right. Now
that's why I modeled Port Costa.
Yeah. Now the thing is, Ken, I remember reading that typically back in the day, they would put the helpers in front of the cabooses because the cabooses otherwise would be getting jostled a lot. If the engine's right behind there. So that was one of the reasons they tucked the helper in a few cars ahead of the crummy. But
this was basically a 4-mile helper district.
Yeah.
And
special.
The guys driving the steam engines at the back, the little 280s, they knew how to softly handle a caboose.
Yeah. Because otherwise the conductors cussed them out. Okay.
Yeah, if you have sounds, you can add special effects.
Yeah, obscenities from the caboose. All right, I'm getting
I think it's
okay. I've caught some of your comments here.
yeah.
And I didn't even think to mention Talgo trucks. I don't know if yeah, Vincent, do you know what a Talgo truck is?
Yes. Well, I think well, I thought it was on the truck, but I could
That's
be
right. The coupler
looking.
the coupler is integral to the truck and it swings with the truck. And I think there is a prototype for it, but in the model, what it does, especially for things like Lionel with 027, the insanely sharp curves, it lets you get equipment around very, very sharp curves. But I do know that if you have stuff that's Talgo truck, shoving it can be a quick route to derailing.
Mhm.
And so that's another
If you
factor here.
daylight, you definitely don't want to try a helper to simulate the helper over a siesta grade, because you'll put everything on the ground
On the ground.
with those articulated freight passenger cars.
Right. Yeah, and those articulated passenger cars, and I think about it, would have the same situation as the well car example I gave here, where the truck under articulation would be pretty heavily loaded because it's carrying 2 half cars, where the truck on the ends are only carrying the weight of 1 half a car.
Try the triple diner.
Oh, and there's a triple one. But again, the where you have a common hinged point with 1 truck, it
Or-
would be loaded twice as much as the trucks on the ends. Okay, Talgo trucks are another.
The triple diners, to my knowledge, were run only on the coast.
Was that because there was so many people to
Maybe
feed?
the San Joaquin as well.
Was it a case where there were just so many passengers to feed that they just made a much bigger diner car, an articulated diner?
No, it was just um, the SP had some strange ideas in the 30s and 40s. And they think it's modern of the world,
Yeah.
And this is before, when they were still competing with DC-3s to fly between LA and San Francisco.
That's right. Desperately trying to figure out how to keep competitive. Oh, well, gentlemen, thank you very much for letting me inflict this on you guys. It was a chance for me to sort of chew over it and see the things that I didn't think about. So thank you very much. Does anybody else have anything they want to mention or talk about before we wrap up for the day?
Adios.
All right. Well, Vincent, thank you very much for your thoughts. Rich, if you're still hearing us, have a good day yourself. And I think I will finish up this session here. Stop recording. All right, so be well, all of you, and catch you in a couple of weeks, if not before.
Thank you.
All right.